And I will, so the recording is in progress. I welcome Bertrand Myre, our new general manager. And Bert, maybe I will just turn over the floor to you and ask you to tell us about yourself and what mistakes you made in life that led you to this point as PAFSO's new general manager.
Well, thank you, Pam. Good morning, everybody. Bonjour tout le monde. Il me fait plaisir d'être présent ce matin. Look, I don't have a kind of like a formal plan in mind here because I want this to be as much interactive as possible. So at any point in time, if you do have any questions, concerns, or would like to make observations, by all means, just ask away and we'll, I'll try to respond to some of your questions to the best of my ability. Essentially, to respond to Pam's question, what mistakes I've made in life that led me to become the new GM of PAFSO. I mean, I won't go into some of my life mistakes because this is going to be a 4-hour presentation, so I'm not going to go there. But essentially, without going through my CV, my resume, just to kind of give you a little bit about my background and which has led me to become the new GM. Although I look really, really young, I'm not as young as I looked. I've been in labor relation for almost 30 years now. And believe it or not, I started on the employer side. I was a labor relation advisor freshly out of school, which, I began thinking that I knew everything in labor relation, only to discover that once I started working, I did not know a whole lot. So I started my career in the public service in the Department of Canadian Heritage, which was not a major department. But back then, we started in 1990. Back then, Parks Canada was part of Canadian Heritage. So, I started off at Parks Canada and, worked my way in and slowly but gradually learned the ropes in labor relation, kind of understood exactly how labor relation worked. Unfortunately, back then, Parks Canada became an agency, so was kind of removed from Canadian Heritage. I actually stayed at Canadian Heritage, and Canadian Heritage was not a department where there was a lot of labor relation issues, so there was not a whole lot of work to do actually back then. So the Professional Institute of the Public Service of Canada, PIPS, also known as PIPS, they approached me to see if I was willing to go on what they told me at the time was on the dark side, so on the union side. And I think that the union kind of fitted more with my vision of labor relation. So I decided to give the union side a try, which I really, really enjoyed. So I started off at PIPS as what they called back then the National Employment Relation Officer, which was mainly to deal with national broad issues and also the consultation with the employer on different matters. Now, obviously that kind of allowed me to get a better perspective on policy work, how union worked. Also, better understand exactly how the political aspect of a union really is present, because I worked closely with, back then, I worked closely with the PIPS vice president and the president's office. So I kind of understood, or at least kind of noticed that there was a lot of political aspect to a union. So got a broader sense of the corporate world of the union side. So I stayed over at PIPS for 2 years. And then I was unfortunately transferred to the operational side, which allowed me to obviously work on different individual cases in labor relation. I got familiar with doing adjudication, which is the equivalent of arbitration in the private sector. So I did a few cases of adjudication when I was at PIPS, and gave me just a sense of the more nitty gritty operational issues dealing one-on-one with the members. I noticed that there's a comment in the chat here. Oh, okay. So that's kind of like the career path that I initially took on in terms of of my role in the union. Shortly after my 2-year stint over at PIPS, the Canadian Association of Professional Employees, CAPE, back then it was called SSEA. So, I mean, we're talking about 20 years ago, approached me and offered me a position as a labor relation officer. I gladly accepted the position and worked over at CAPE for 20 years, representing the EC group, the Economic and Social Service group. And out of my 20-year tenure over at CAPE, I worked at least 10 years at Stats Canada. My portfolio was Stats Canada, which is essentially the bread and butter of CAPE. That's where most ECs worked at. Gave me a chance to experience all kinds of labor relation issues. And I specifically, I think, acquired a vast experience and knowledge in human rights issues, because over at CAPE, human rights accommodation became a very, very important subject matter kind of situation. So mostly dealt with human rights cases, and that was my area of expertise over there at CAPE. For my 20 years over there. Also during my tenure at CAPE, I also occupied the position of senior labor relation officer, which is essentially provide general kind of functional managerial responsibilities over the labor relation officer team. I did this for 2 years. So essentially I was managing the labor relation officers, and it was a really, really eye-opening experience, because when you're managing people, it's one thing to manage employees. When you're managing a group of professionals that their expertise is in labor relation, that's certainly a different kind of environment, because they know their collective agreement and terms and conditions of employment by heart, and you got to make sure that you're on top of your game when you're dealing with labor relation expert, obviously. So I did this for 2 years, and afterwards they kind of posted the position as a director, and I did not, at that point in my career, did not want to do a manager role. I was quite comfortable doing labor relation and dealing with employees and their concern in the workplace. So I decided not to apply for the manager position and stayed a labor relation advisor or officer. And continued on for 5 years over at CAPE. At which point, I stumbled upon an ad at PAFSO saying that they were looking for a labor relation advisor. And for me, PAFSO was certainly an interesting organization. From my understanding of the membership, it was something that, anyway, for me, was certainly an interesting group of people to represent and to help. The size of the organization was also something for me that was attractive. So I applied for the position. Interestingly enough, I applied on the last day, which was a Friday afternoon at almost 3 o'clock. I got a call from PAFSO on the Monday morning. Met with the group that was doing the selection process on Monday afternoon, and by Monday 4 o'clock, I was offered the position. So it was certainly something that was done anyway quite rapidly. And I was pleased that they made me the offer, and I immediately accepted the offer. So I decided to join PAFSO and be a labor relation advisor there. It was kind of interesting when I joined the group, because both the former executive director, Kim Cole, and myself were kind of coming in the organization a week apart. So it was kind of funny that both Kim joined the organization. I came in a week later, and both of us were kind of brand new. So obviously we kind of had to rely on the current staff to kind of understand exactly what the environment was, and what type of situation we were dealing with. And you know, because of probably my experience and my years of service as a labor relation officer, I was able to kind of get the case that was kind of thrown at me, and go from there. And I can tell you, the first year over at PAFSO was certainly a learning experience for me on how the FS community works, what the issues were, and trying to understand how this rotational kind of assignment staffing regime worked, which is something that was very, very new to me. I was obviously, my experience was more dealing with employees that had substantive position. That was their position, and there weren't any rotation. There weren't any, chances of moving different part of the organization. I mean, most of the members, or most of the employees that I dealt with before PAFSO, they were in their position for roughly 10, 20 years. So this was all brand new to me. It was certainly something interesting to try and figure out and discover how, the terms and conditions of employment for an FS would apply, and how would this apply for the general labor relation kind of recourse and process that we have in the public service. So my first year was a learning curve, really, really interesting. And I can tell you, even though I have 30 years of experience, I'm still seeing cases that I've never had before. So every day when I come to work, there's always something new. And for some reason, the FS cases are more interesting, certainly more interesting than the EC group. So that's essentially how I ended up at PAFSO. Now, as you may know, our former executive director left the organization this summer. So the position of the a new title, general manager, was open. And I thought about whether or not at this point in my career, given that I'm getting a little bit older and hopefully wiser, I decided personally that it was time for me to go into a managerial role. I've been doing representation for 30 years. I think I was up for a new challenge, and decided to apply for the position. I'm not entirely sure, and I don't want to put Pam on the spot here, but I don't think initially the organization thought that I would be the preferred candidate for the position, but I think I was able to kind of explain how I would personally bring some new things on the table for the organization. I think the selection board enjoyed and liked what I had to say, so they decided that I was the candidate for the position, and I certainly accepted the offer, and I'm looking forward to the many challenges that are ahead. I think PAFSO right now is at the point of maturity where we're looking into how we're going to kind of set the organization for our long-term goal. You all know that we've recently hired, or at least elected, Pam as a full-time president. So that started obviously the direction and where we're going. I'm the new GM. I have my own views and my own priorities for the organization. I think I understand exactly where the members of XCOM wants to go with the organization. And my job essentially is to take their orientation and on an operational level, on a day-to-day basis, kind of set up the organization in a way that fits with the XCOM's orientation. So essentially, this is kind of where I went, where I'm coming from, and hopefully this will guide me as to where I think the organization should go. So is there, at this point in time, is there any questions or comments that people want to kind of chime in on?
Maybe just as until people while people gather their thoughts, I'll just say, yeah, you're right. When we were looking to staff the general manager job, honestly, my thinking was that we were going to need to go outside. And part of that was because we knew we were going to have to, if we hired internally, we didn't know that Bert was going to apply, but we would be thinking, okay, we would have to replace an internal, then you have to replace the internal person too, but also because, we wanted somebody who would be able to bring perspective of, we're trying to do some new things with PAFSO. We're trying to integrate our sort of political level and our labor, like all of our operational stuff a little bit better, our professional association side and our labor relations side. We want to get everything working together so that we're addressing some of the root causes of some of the issues that we have. Some of the root causes of the problems that the FS group is seeing, even on the labor relations side, come back to, not having political support in some ways, not having maybe senior management support, having a senior management cadres that are no longer coming from the FS group, in the way that they used to be. And so we don't have that sort of automatic sympathy and understanding for what our jobs mean and how they affect our lives. So when Bert presented his candidacy, I have to admit my thinking was, oh, okay, interesting. We will definitely, we'll interview Bert. But we were surprised and impressed by the level of understanding that you brought, and you definitely won the job. We got well over 100 applications for the position, and we narrowed it down to about 25 serious CVs. And then from that, we interviewed, I think it was 8 people. And of that group, we would say there were 3 or 4 who definitely could have done the job, but Bert was head and shoulders above the rest. So from, skepticism from me, not related to Bert as an individual or as an officer, but just on what we were looking for the organization, we were completely blown out of the water. So it was definitely not one of those situations where, ooh, you have an internal candidate and you feel like you have to, because we had another plan for Bert, slightly restructuring the way labor relations was going to be done. That was going to be a way of recognizing his skills and experience in that job. So I wasn't worried about oh, if we don't, if we don't promote the internal candidate's going to be unhappy, because we had what I think was an attractive, would have been an attractive idea for that. So I see that there is a question in the Q&A. Oh, Logan says no questions. Okay. So yeah, does anyone else have any anything that they want to address or that they want to ask? I just would like to remind people, the one thing is, this is not a forum to address your sort of individual labor relations, like case type questions. So just to be clear about that, we can put you in touch with Bert offline for those kinds of things, but we should keep it general and kind of policy level for this discussion. Tam, go ahead. Well,
Okay,
I'm
sorry, I'm
listening. I'm
just
just going to
walking into
get
my
some
office
coffee.
doing
So.
15 things at once. My question is just for maybe Bert's experience. How open is the employer to working with us, really, as opposed to giving lip service? Like something Pam commented on the Facebook group was that we should have a representative on working group B or A or whatever working group that is for the special cases. And I'm like, if I was the employer whose goal appears to be to stop people from getting as much as possible, I would be like, no, I do not want anyone from the union on there, because all they're going to do is try and get us to give them more money. And that's what we're trying to avoid. So how, what are the actual, like, are they open to those kind of things, or would we be basically hitting our head up against, I don't know what their attitude is toward us? Or
Tam, this is a very interesting and pertinent question, I think. In my dealings anyway with in the government, I mean, in my 30-year experience, I've dealt with almost all departments in the federal public service. And I can tell you, I mean, even, and I know Logan is on the line here, even between GAC and IRCC, there are certainly a difference in mentality or philosophy in how the department, each respective department, deals with PAFSO or any other union for that matter. I mean, I don't think you need to be a rocket scientist to know that labor relation has evolved in the last 30 years. Obviously, the type of relation that we used to traditionally see, right? Those days are over, and more now, the employer with the big E, right, certainly has to involve and consult with the unions ahead of making some very important decision that may have an impact on the employee's terms and conditions of employment. So, we would normally see a department consulting with the union before making important decision. And in fact, consultation is now part of the legislation. So it's an obligation on the part of the employer to consult with unions before they make a decision that affects the membership of the unions. Unfortunately, there are discrepancies. There are some differences between Global Affairs Canada and IRCC, just in the way that they do business with the union, with us mainly, right? Now, if you ask me point blank whether or not Global Affairs is kind of avant-garde in terms of how they approach issues, how they involve unions before reaching decisions or before communicating decisions, I mean, they're not the most progressive avant-garde department out there, to be quite honest. They're certainly less prone to consult with unions than at IRCC, for example, where IRCC, they have a strong, very strong consultation body, right, that is quite defined, whereas in GAC, for some reason, they're using more the ad hoc kind of approach. They go along as need be, and sometimes obviously they do involve us in other situation. They don't always involve us or consult with us the way I think they should, but that's my personal opinion, right? This is, sorry, go ahead, Pam.
Oh, sorry, no, I don't want to interrupt you. Go.
No.
I just wanted to say that sometimes, you know, it can work both ways, right? And sometimes what I see is that the employer wants to involve us sometimes on things where really it's their responsibility and their decision.
Yep.
And I feel like sometimes that it can be a way of, you know, kind of making it seem like we had a say in some things when we did not. And when in fact it's, you know, it's up to them to administer certain things, to provide certain things, and to deal with, you know, how they do it. And to, you know, if they're violating labor laws or, you know, basic rights, to know the collective agreements, and you know, if they end up going against that, to deal with grievances and with employee recourse, rather than, you know, sometimes I feel like they're wanting us to sort of agree to something that might be kind of outside the collective agreement, and then say, well, you agreed, and so, you know, your members have to live with this. So I feel like you're right, Tam, like we don't always sort of feel like we get the proper, really meaningful consultation, although we do get it quite often on a number of things. I also get from both GAC and IRC a lot of informal consultation, which, you know, we don't really kind of talk about too publicly because we don't want to ruin those channels. But, you know, people do come to us and say like, hey, we're thinking about this, and how does this look? And we have an opportunity to influence informally. But often what I see is it's kind of goes the other way. And, you know, the other thing about things like having representation on the relevant FSD, you know, subcommittees and working groups and so on, is one of the things we have to accept when we take part in those is that you don't 100% represent just the interests of PAFSO or the membership on those things. When you take part in an FSD committee, you agree that you represent the interests of the employee side of the National Joint Council. And so one thing we would have to accept if we have representation on these is that, for God's sake, sorry, is that, you know, our representatives would not always be able to do what we want them to do. You know, there would be times when we would not be, you know, just having somebody on PAFSO doesn't necessarily mean that members would get their way on things. And sometimes there are points where we would have to be making trade-offs and making, you know, decisions, like balancing different competing interests. So that's, you know, just having somebody there is not necessarily going to be a panacea. So I see we have a question. We keep seeing examples of harassment. Are there many FS employees affected, or are we doing the harassing? What can PAFSO do to go after cases that should be nipped in the bud much sooner?
Well, that's in itself, that's a question that we can certainly spend days on. Look, the FS community is not different than any other kind of, you know, other job in the federal public service, in the sense that yes, there are harassment cases, and it seems to become more and more of a trend, unfortunately, right now. I don't know if it's because of the social media or people are just maybe frustrated because of the pandemic, but we're sensing that there's a lot more tension in the workplace. And unfortunately, I mean, it like any other level of society, I think right now, it's getting way worse. Not in terms of sheer numbers, but I think in terms of the nature of the harassment cases that are brought forward to the organization. We're seeing more and more cases right now where there's actually bullying, although technically the term does not exist in the federal public service. We're seeing more bullying going on, more intimidation, more threats, and essentially more violence. Whether it's not really physical violence, but more psychological violence. We're seeing a whole lot more cases that is coming up, unfortunately. And I have to say, those cases arises when there's a conflict between a manager and an employee. Whether the manager's an FS, it does happen, but this is part of our new reality. Now, fortunately, since January 2021, there is new legislation dealing with harassment and violence in the workplace under the Ontario Occupation Health legislation. Now, again, although there's new legislation, unfortunately, right now, over at least at Global Affairs Canada, the department is not really up to par with the new legislation. So right now, the difficult situation that we have is that the investigation process that should happen under the new legislation or the new legal framework is not necessarily being followed by officials over at GAC. So this is part of our reality. This is part of some of the issues, the ongoing issues we're having with harassment in the workplace. Now, for me anyway, and this is my personal opinion anyway, if really the department considers harassment as being something that should be unacceptable in the workplace, right? Which
is an if, sorry to say.
No, but they're certainly not taking the redress mechanism, or at least I don't think they're investing in some of the the framework that needs to be implemented in order to really deal with harassment in the workplace, and more importantly, not only deal with harassment, but put barriers and put things inside that would ensure that harassment is eliminated in the workplace. We can certainly understand that right now FSs are dealing with realities that not a whole lot of public servant deals with, right? And this is a stressor, and this causes stress and anxiety in the workplace. And sometimes stress, there's a direct link between stress and harassment, right? We're moving in a time where people are required to meet work objectives, sometimes unrealistic work objectives, right? And it's a known fact that especially when a manager has to produce to a level that is unrealistic, well, that manager tends to take probably managerial examples or motivation that is not really in touch with reality, and it has a serious impact on the employees. So yes, unfortunately, harassment is part of our daily issues that we're facing right now.
And I mean, yeah, part of it I is like a big part of the elephant in the room is, there's a toxic management culture and toxic, I would say, overall organizational culture in the Foreign Service. Their heads of mission in particular have, so much power over people when they're out when they're out at mission, and even when they're at headquarters. If you're rotational and you want another assignment, somebody can really ruin your reputation and harm your prospects. And so at the kind of like cultural level, we've been doing a few things. We worked with the department with GAC 2 years ago to create bystander intervention training. And we did the initial study and initial pilot sessions. And then GAC is now in the process of turning that into an ongoing training session. They had some glitches with their contracting and so on. So I don't think they've rolled it out for everybody yet. But, I would suggest to everybody that, getting that training as soon as you can would probably be a good thing. And it gives you some tools to recognize when a situation is about to get out of hand and to intervene, not necessarily, sorry, you can hear my dogs coughing and snorting in the background. I apologize. Life with two 15-year-old pugs. But it's not something, PASO can't be there with everybody in their day-to-day. Right. So this gives some tools for if you see a situation where, things are sort of starting to get out of hand, and you notice something, gives you some things that you could say to perhaps, just make everybody think about what's happening in a non-confrontational way. And also, you reach out to support the person who you see as being targeted, and also frankly awareness of our own behavior, because I think that sometimes somebody wrote RFS doing the harassing, in some cases sometimes. And also we're going to do, for our Tradecraft week, we're going to do a panel on quote unquote managing up, this famous phrase, right, that people use, how so-and-so got promoted because they manage up and they kick down, but it's not a bad thing to manage up. And I think sometimes, Bert sees it, we see it in, when we look at overall some of the stories that we hear from people, there are some things, that people may not realize is making their relationships with their bosses harder. And there are some things you can do to make things easier and just overall reduce the level of stress in the organization, which goes a long way, I think, to avoiding that kind of behavior. I see that Laurent typed a question in the chat. If you had to bet, when will this round of contract negotiations end? Will we go a year or more without a contract?
Look, we're starting the bargaining, the collective bargaining process. We're at the table actually next week. So this is going to be our first meeting with the TBS negotiator. At this time, it's really hard to kind of pinpoint or be able, if I had a crystal ball, I would be able to answer the question. Unfortunately, we don't have a crystal ball right now. And it's kind of difficult to kind of put an actual potential date on when we're going to finish off collective bargaining. The issue, there are a lot of external factors or issues that we need to consider that we don't have any control over. For example, we don't control who the negotiator at Treasury Board is, our counterpart, right, in terms of who's negotiating the contract for Treasury Board. And sometimes you have a negotiator that has the experience, that knows exactly what their mandate is, and they're able to kind of steer the negotiation in the right path, right? Sometimes you have you're quote unquote stuck with the negotiator that doesn't have any experience, not entirely sure or clear as to what her or his mandate is, right? And sometimes that makes discussions and negotiations more difficult. Unfortunately, at this time, it appears that our negotiator or counterpart negotiator is somebody who's fairly new, doesn't necessarily have all the experience in doing these type of negotiations, and not too sure exactly if she knows what her mandate is. So it's going to be difficult, as far as I'm concerned, to be able to know when we'll be able to expect to come to a settlement before we actually start the discussion process and have a better sense of, where the parties wants to go with this, because at this point, we're not sure exactly. Some of the issues that will be raised at the bargaining table might be a little bit more difficult than we anticipated. So it all depends on the nitty-gritty, discussions between the parties, and we'll have to kind of wait and see. So all this to say, Laurent, si tu me demandes la question dans 4-5 mois, probablement que ma réponse va être un petit peu plus claire et ferme. Malheureusement, il est un peu trop tôt là, pour être en mesure de vraiment donner une appréciation à quel moment on peut s'attendre à avoir une entente à la table. Désolé.
Merci beaucoup. I see there's another question about PSAC is saying they're having trouble getting the employer to agree to reasonable economic increases, but there doesn't seem to be an appetite for a strike. Maybe I could just chime in a little bit on it. From my perspective, what I'm seeing is that we're on the conciliation strike or arbitration strike, right? Binding arbitration.
Binding arbitration.
Yes, that. Mixing up two different things. And, I would be surprised if ours moves really fast. And I don't think that there is necessarily a benefit to us in driving to impasse and getting to arbitration faster than the normal process, because any arbitrator is going to want to be looking at what the settlements are with the big organizations to get a sense of, what is reasonable for the public sector. So to that sense, I mean, we're watching all these other negotiations closely. While our main priority is a strong economic increase for the FS group, but there are some other non-monetary things that we have as well. And, if we may be able to get some of those addressed. So inflation is now, and hopefully we can get there sooner rather than later. Yeah, I mean, we're certainly not going to dawdle, but we're also not going to drive to impasse and end up getting less than we could because we were too rushed for the sake of 1 or 2 or 3 or 4%, right? It will come out in the end. So did you want to talk maybe, Bert, about what you think of as the public sentiment about strikes? And also, this is a question that I have, if we're on the arbitration track, can we still do things like yeah.
Yes, it's always possible to do work to rule as long as it's not considered to be a strike, right? And some of different bargaining agents have used different tactics in the past. For example, denying or not doing any overtime. That's that's normally some work to rule kind of effort that is done as we go along in the collective bargaining process. If we have a sense that we'll likely reach an impasse at one point, obviously the bargaining committee will come back to the membership and propose different strategy to make sure that we send a strong message to employer. I mean, sometimes we saw that in the past. Sometimes we're asking members to wear black or to wear a specific
purple. We were purple
or whatever color we may choose. I saw pink at one point. We can have obviously buttons or all kinds of swags or promotion kind of tools out there. This is something that strategy wise we'll have to kind of think of as we go along in the collective bargaining process. It is important, however, to clearly understand that if you've chosen arbitration route, well, you cannot go on strike. You cannot decide not to go to work, but we can use different type of leave that is at our disposal to make sure that we communicate a clear message to the employer, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Um,
But one of the things I think that members can do to support all of this process is just know your collective agreement and follow it. And we will be doing some education on some of that. But like I hear people, I see sometimes on the Facebook group, somebody saying things like, "Oh, I got an email at 11:30 at night telling me that they needed a briefing note from me at 8 o'clock the next morning." And I'm like, what are you doing on your email at 11:30 at night? And why are you training the employer to think that they are going to be able to reach you that way? If you're on standby, you should be getting paid for standby. And the employer, it's fine. They do have the right to ask for a home number or something to reach you. But if they need you to do something in the middle of the night, the onus is on them to call you and call you back to work. Like this, I'm getting taskings at 11:30 at night. It's like, you're not on the job at 11:30 at night. So, people need to respect their own working hours and respect the idea that, the employer does not buy 100% of our lives. I mean, we as rotational employees, we give up more of our lives and our personal lives, but still not 100%. Like, you have the right to quiet hours where you at least get to sleep.
that
And if they want you for something, they can hunt you down.
that's an important point here, Pam, because because the FS group is professional. You're all professional, right? There's certainly a misunderstanding, I think, of what professional means, and professional does not mean that you're at the employer's beck and call or disposition on a 24-hour basis, right? I mean, PAFSO has negotiated terms and conditions of employment, which you will find in your collective agreement. And I think if you're giving the employer more than what is in the collective agreement, although you are professionals, I personally believe that members are not doing themselves a favor by not following the terms and conditions of employment in the collective agreement. As you all know, one of the terms and conditions of employment for FSs is that you might be posted, abroad or anywhere where there's an operational need on a rotational basis. That's a term and conditions of employment. But that does not mean that you're on call 24 hours a day. So there's a big difference there. And sometimes that doesn't seem to be quite understood by our members, right? Anyway, there's a work-life balance that needs to kind of take ownership here. And
Yeah.
I just want to kind of inform members that if they're not following the terms and conditions of employment outlined in their collective agreement, well, they're not doing themselves a favor, and it's not helping the professional association, right?
No, and it's not helping colleagues either if that becomes the expectation. Well,
Yeah.
you don't answer your phone, you don't look at your email at 11:30 at night. Well, your colleague in the next section over does. I mean, one of the things I think we've had this conversation before about standby. If everybody claimed, everyone who's basically expected to be monitoring their email, after hours in the evenings during the week and all waking hours on the weekend claims standby, that would mean that everybody would, and took it even as comp time, that would mean you would basically get an extra a 1 week off for every 4.
Yeah.
So that would be like 3 months of comp time that they would have to give everybody. And I think that they would notice that 25% increase in costs and so on. So like, there are things that we can do to make everybody aware of what we're providing, that are well within, that are already in the collective agreement, and that would have an impact. So we'll be talking, I think, a bit more about some of that stuff. I see someone has asked a question. Does PAFSO meet with outgoing single assignment employees. I mean, we do if they request it, but Bert, maybe you can answer that.
Well, it's on a case by case basis, and obviously if they want to meet with us, we're certainly willing to meet with them, right? So this is more an individual matter than a broad collective matter, right?
Yeah, like it's not a well, we don't have the power to make that kind of a requirement. But we do, when I talk to HFP or people like that, I do always suggest, hey, tell people that PAFSO is available and that they can speak to them. And we always suggest people join the FS Facebook group, which is not run by PAFSO, but a good place to get information and communications. And then we have them on our list, and they get the updates from me and the other email, and they have access to my PAFSO and so on.
And
oh, sorry, Bert.
no, sorry, because I have another engagement, unfortunately, at 10 o'clock. The last point I would like to kind of address here in terms of where the organization is going moving forward, right? Where is PAFSO heading? And as we've mentioned several times during this presentation this morning, the professional association has kind of two components to it, right? There's the more professional association side where, although we're not a lobbyist group, we want to approach some of the concerns from our members on their day-to-day kind of delivery service as an FS, right? That part, PAFSO is currently working on getting more strategic, maybe potentially looking at additional resources, and obviously coming up with a governance structure to kind of deal with what generally is more like the professional issues that FSs are going through. Unfortunately, this area is not governed by any legislation, so therefore there's no proper formal recourses when we have issues that pertains to the realities of the FSs in their work, right? So but that's an area where we do want to emphasize a little bit more in terms of what we can do to promote and to kind of defend the interest of our membership as a whole, right? In your role as a foreign service officer. Obviously, we also have another side to our organization, which is more traditional, and it's somewhat of a union kind of, role, which that one is a little bit more clear for us. It's a little bit more defined because that's what we basically do on a daily basis, where we do offer representation to our members on two levels, right? The collective level, which we've discussed this morning, for example, collective bargaining, and also FSDs. This is where we do representation on a collective basis, and we also offer representation services on an individual level, right? Where we have a team of 3 labor relation advisor, well-seasoned labor relation advisor team that provides help and services to our members on an individual matter for which they have issues in the workplace, right? Now, on the union side, it's a little bit more easier for us because there are some some formal recourses available, right? Which is our job to kind of help and guide our members as they use some of the formal recourses available, if and only if we're not able to resolve their matters informally. So my hope and my priority for the organization is to kind of develop the advocacy role that the union can play, and at the same time continue to offer the best possible services, representational services, to our members. That for me is number one priority, and I'm looking forward to the many challenges ahead, and I know they're going to be interesting. And I do want to emphasize on the fact that we have right now, we have the internal resources, the competency, and the quality of our staff to deal with those issues. And I want all of you to know that we have your best interests at heart, and we will work constantly in trying to make sure that we offer you the best possible services. That's the overall message I kind of wanted to end my presentation this morning.
That is a great message. Thanks, Bert. I will turn the recording off and say